I didn't feel like I escaped. I felt like I was released. The fracture sealed behind us with a sound that wasn't sound, more like reality deciding not to follow. When my feet finally touched solid ground, I didn't trust it. Solid things had lied to me before. Time had lied. Space had lied. Even my own memories had learned how to rearrange themselves when it suited the design. Nova collapsed beside me, gasping, flickering between versions like a broken reflection that couldn't decide which truth to keep. The architect's eyes were gone, but their weight remained, pressed into the back of my skull like fingerprints burned into thought. We were alive. That didn't mean we were safe. Because once you see the blueprint of the universe, you realize something terrifying. Nothing is accidental anymore. The place we landed in looked calm enough to be believable, and that made it dangerous. A long stretch of open land, gray sky unmoving, air perfectly still. No wind. No echoes. No distant hum of timelines tearing themselves apart. Just silence, polished smooth like it had been scrubbed of consequence. Nova scanned the horizon, her eyes struggling to stay synchronized. She was quieter than usual. That scared me more than panic ever could. Paradoxes don't go silent unless something is pressing on them from all sides. I knelt, pressed my palm against the ground. It didn't push back. This wasn't stability. It was constraint. Like a room designed to hold something volatile. Thick walls, padded edges, no windows. The kind of place where explosions are expected, but contained. The architect hadn't lost us. He had placed us. Nova's breathing stuttered, her form splitting again. Two outlines fighting for dominance, neither willing to let the other exist alone. She dropped to her knees, hands clutching her head as if memory itself had weight. She told me once that being a paradox felt like listening to two radios at the same time. Different songs, same station, both insisting they were the original broadcast. Now it sounded louder. I reached for her, and the glyph beneath my skin pulsed in response. Not violently. Not defensively. Almost sympathetically. Like two flawed systems recognizing shared damage. She's pulling me apart, Nova whispered. Not Seraph. Him. The architect. He didn't need to touch you to change you. He didn't chase. He refined. Every second Nova existed, she challenged his design, and systems like his don't tolerate anomalies for long. I realized then. She wasn't just vulnerable. She was a deadline. As Nova stabilized, I looked outward again, and noticed something wrong. Everything here worked too cleanly. Clouds didn't drift. Light didn't bend. Distance felt fixed, immutable, as if the world had been solved down to its final equation. There were no micro-errors. No noise. No randomness. Even my footsteps landed where they were expected to. Choice was missing. I've lived inside broken realities long enough to know the difference between chaos and control. Chaos gives you openings. Control gives you walls that look like freedom. This place had no doors. The architect wasn't erasing worlds anymore. He was building perfect ones. And perfect systems don't allow improvisation, because improvisation leads to error. Error leads to deviation. Deviation leads to variables. Variables lead to people like me. That's when it hit me. Not like a revelation. Like an accusation. The architect wasn't threatened by humanity because we were violent, emotional, or flawed. He was threatened because we were inefficient in the most dangerous way possible. We choose without optimization. We sacrifice without calculation. We resist even when resistance guarantees loss. From a design perspective, that's catastrophic. From a human one, it's everything. Nova didn't exist because the system failed. She existed because two timelines refused to agree on a single outcome, and instead of collapsing, they compromised. The architect called that instability. I called it proof. Because if reality could bend without breaking, then maybe his design wasn't inevitable. Maybe it was incomplete. And maybe the flaw wasn't us. The glyph burned, Not painfully, but insistently. Like a warning light refusing to shut off. I'd spent so long thinking it was a curse, a leash, a mark that tied me to disaster. But standing there, watching Nova fight to stay whole, I finally understood its purpose. It wasn't a key. It was feedback. The glyph didn't force me into timelines. It reacted to instability. It measured contradiction. It sensed when reality didn't know which version of itself to believe. The architect saw timelines as structures. The glyph saw them as conversations. That difference mattered. Because structures break when stressed. Conversations adapt. They loop. They argue. They evolve. If the architect was trying to silence reality, then the glyph was listening to it. And for the first time, I realized. He didn't design it. I did. Nova froze mid-breath. I felt it too. The pressure shift, the subtle recalibration of space, like the room adjusting to an unexpected number of occupants. Footsteps echoed across the ground. But there were no bodies. Instead, distortions moved toward us, outlines without form, silhouettes defined by absence rather than presence. The architect's enforcement layer. Not soldiers. Not machines. Corrections. These entities didn't attack. They didn't threaten. They simply erased inconsistencies by occupying them until reality agreed they were never there. Nova was screaming now, not in pain, but in resistance. Her timelines pulled against each other harder, destabilizing the air itself. I stepped forward instinctively. If they reached her first, she wouldn't die. She would be simplified. And I couldn't allow that. Not because she was important, but because she was right. I didn't fight them. I interrupted them. The glyph flared, not as a weapon, but as a broadcast, dumping conflicting temporal data directly into the corrections path. Past and future collided inside their logic, forcing them to pause. Systems like theirs depend on clarity. I gave them ambiguity. The ground rippled. The silhouettes distorted, struggling to resolve which version of reality they were meant to enforce. Nova's timeline surged outward, amplifying the contradiction like feedback through a speaker. For a moment, just a moment, the architect's design hesitated. That was all I needed to know. He wasn't omnipotent. He was precise. And precision fails when forced to choose between equally valid outcomes. The pause ended violently. Space snapped back with authority, hurling me backward like an error being rejected. I hit the ground hard, breath leaving my body in a way that reminded me I was still painfully human. Nova screamed my name. The corrections advanced again, slower now, cautious, learning. That scared me more than speed. Because adaptation meant escalation. The architect didn't correct immediately. He observed. He refined. And every second we resisted, we taught him something new about the flaw he hadn't anticipated. Us. Resistance wasn't free. Every act of defiance sharpened his response. I realized then that survival wasn't the goal anymore. Understanding was. Because if we didn't figure out how to break the design entirely, he would simply improve it until we disappeared. I pulled myself up, ignoring the pain, ignoring the way reality seemed to press back harder with every step. Nova met my eyes, both versions of her aligning just long enough to communicate something without words. She trusted me. That was the most dangerous thing anyone could do. We can't keep running, I said quietly. Not to her. To myself. The architect didn't fear confrontation. He expected it. What he hadn't planned for was choice without strategy. Movement without prediction. If he designed endings, then we needed to design interference. Not a weapon. Not a rebellion. A flaw so fundamental that his system couldn't correct it without destroying itself. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I knew where to start. I felt him before I saw him. Not a presence, a recalculation. The air tightened, not physically, but logically, as if probability itself was being adjusted in real time. The corrections halted again, pulling back like pieces on a board waiting for instruction. The architect didn't appear. He didn't need to. This wasn't intervention. This was assessment. Every move I'd made, every contradiction Nova generated, every hesitation in his system, all of it was being recorded, categorized, weighed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't threatened. He was curious. And curiosity, in a being like him, was far more dangerous than rage. Because rage reacts. Curiosity redesigns. I realized then that we weren't fighting an enemy. We were being audited. Our resistance was data. Our survival was feedback. And somewhere in his endless design space, a new version of the ending was already being drafted. Nova gasped, then spoke in a voice that wasn't entirely hers. Fragments spilled out of her, words layered over themselves, futures leaking through her present like water through cracked glass. Cities I didn't recognize. Skies with unfamiliar constellations. Versions of Earth that felt unfinished. She wasn't remembering. She was accessing. Every time he sorts a world, she said, eyes unfocused, he keeps the cleanest parts. The rest get archived or erased. I understood immediately what she meant. The architect didn't destroy timelines outright. He recycled them. Nova wasn't just a paradox. She was residual data from realities that refused to disappear completely. A compression artifact of existence itself. That meant something critical. If enough fragments survived inside her, then deletion wasn't absolute. And absolute systems can't tolerate leftovers. The glyph pulsed again, sharper this time, directional. Not a warning. A location. Somewhere beneath the stillness of this controlled world, something old stirred, a signal buried so deep it had avoided optimization. A place where discarded timelines weren't erased, only forgotten. An archive. The architect didn't need to revisit failures. He moved forward, always forward, pruning behind him without looking back. That was his blind spot. Designers hate clutter. Nova stiffened as the same signal resonated through her, both versions aligning briefly like overlapping shadows snapping into focus. That's where he puts the mistakes, she whispered. Mistakes. I smiled despite myself. Because history has proven something over and over again. Every revolution starts in the trash bin. We moved carefully, not because we feared detection, but because movement itself drew attention. In a world built on static perfection, motion is an anomaly. Every step we took sent subtle ripples outward, not through space, but through probability. The ground didn't shake. The sky didn't react. But the silence grew heavier, like an algorithm trying to compensate for unexpected input. I realized then that stealth wasn't about hiding. It was about behaving unpredictably. Nova helped by existing. Her presence warped calculations around us, introducing constant micro-errors into the architect's predictive layer. To him, we weren't moving forward. We were jittering. And jitter breaks models. The closer we got to the signal, the more resistance we felt. Not force, but correction attempts failing to lock on. We were inside his blind math now. The archive wasn't underground. It was beneath relevance. A hollowed region of reality where resolution dropped, details softened, and physics behaved like an afterthought. Broken versions of worlds hovered here, not destroyed, just incomplete. Cities missing decades. People frozen mid-decision. Entire timelines paused at moments where outcomes refused to converge. This was where he put the things he couldn't fix cleanly. Nova trembled. I hear them, she said. All of them. Every almost world. The architect didn't erase failure. He contained it. Which meant the failures still existed. Which meant they could still speak. And suddenly, the weight of what we were attempting hit me. We weren't stealing a weapon. We were waking the dead. It started as static. Then words. Not voices. Impressions. Intentions. Echoes of resistance imprinted into the fabric of discarded realities. Billions of decisions that refused alignment, pressing outward all at once. The archive wasn't silent. It was screaming quietly. Nova dropped to her knees as the pressure intensified, timelines within her resonating with the fragments around us. She was a tuning fork, and this place was a symphony of unresolved existence. I felt it too, the glyph vibrating in response, not overwhelmed, but completing a circuit. For the first time, the system wasn't rejecting contradiction. It was amplifying it. The architect sorted. We accumulated. And accumulation, given enough mass, becomes unstoppable. Reality snapped. The silence shattered like glass, and suddenly he was there, not fully formed, but unmistakable. 6 golden eyes burning through layers of space, geometry folding inward around his presence. You are contaminating the archive, he said calmly. Not angry. Concerned. That was worse. Nova screamed as his attention locked onto her, her timelines flaring violently under scrutiny. He wasn't attacking. He was isolating variables. You are unnecessary, he continued. You introduce inefficiency. I stepped forward without thinking. So does hope, I said. And you haven't eliminated that yet. For the first time. He hesitated. The architect recalculated in real time. I could feel it, the delay between intent and execution stretching longer than before. The archive resisted him. The accumulated contradictions interfered with his authority. You mistake noise for meaning, he said. No, I replied. I mistake choice for life. His gaze sharpened. Because choice can't be predicted perfectly. It can only be approximated. And approximations fail catastrophically under scale. The archive wasn't one mistake. It was billions. Each one small. Insignificant alone. But together. A pressure system. A flaw large enough to collapse design itself. Nova stood, shaking, splitting, stabilizing herself through sheer force of will. I'm not an error, she said, both voices speaking in unison. I'm proof. She stepped deeper into the archive, letting it resonate fully through her. Timelines surged, fragments aligning around her like orbiting debris. The architect reached out. Too late. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was anchoring. Every discarded reality snapped into coherence around her paradox, forming something new, not stable, not perfect. Alive. And in that moment, I understood. Nova wasn't the flaw. She was the bridge. The archive erupted, not explosively, but directionally. Data flowed. Timelines overlapped intentionally. The architect's correction layer strained, attempting to compress complexity into order and failing at every pass. For the first time since his creation, the design was losing. Not because we overpowered it, but because we overwhelmed it with meaning. He could destroy worlds, but he couldn't erase choice fast enough to stop it multiplying. As Nova held the archive together, I felt the glyph blaze, not as a mark of control, but as a conduit. We weren't fighting him anymore. We were rewriting the rules of engagement. And the architect finally understood. The flaw wasn't in the design. It was in assuming life could ever be finished. The architect didn't retreat. He adjusted. The archive bent inward as his presence intensified, layers of discarded timelines compressing under renewed pressure. I felt the system recalibrate, not to erase us, but to contain us more efficiently. Containment is preferable to collapse, he said. That told me everything. He wasn't afraid of failure. He was afraid of instability spreading. The correction fields tightened, reducing the archive's range, forcing contradictions into smaller spaces where they could cancel each other out. It was elegant, ruthless, almost beautiful, and still, it lagged. Every adaptation took time, and time was the one resource he could never fully reclaim once choice entered the equation. The more he corrected, the more complex the system became. Design thrives on simplicity. Life doesn't. Nova screamed, not in pain, but in overload. The paradox within her strained as the architect focused directly on her structure, isolating threads of identity, attempting to separate versions cleanly. To him, she wasn't a person. She was a formatting error. Her body flickered violently, layers peeling back. Child, adult, futures that never lived long enough to name themselves. I grabbed her instinctively, grounding her with presence, not logic. You're real, I said. You exist because you choose to. His influence intensified. Existence is not consent, the architect replied. But Nova didn't disappear. She endured. And endurance, I realized, was the most inefficient thing in the universe. The archive reacted. Not as a weapon, as a memory. Entire fragments surged outward, rejected timelines asserting themselves briefly into coherence. Skies ignited with colors from dead worlds. Gravity buckled under incompatible laws. The architect faltered again, only for a fraction of a second. But that fraction mattered. Because control systems are brittle. They assume compliance. The archive didn't comply. It reminded the system of everything it failed to resolve. And failure, once remembered, spreads. For the first time, his voice changed. Not loud. Sharp. This configuration is inefficient, he said. It will collapse. Yes, I answered. Eventually. He turned toward me fully now, attention shifting away from Nova. And you believe collapse is preferable? I didn't hesitate. Collapse creates room for something new. That answer unsettled him more than resistance ever could. Because collapse isn't an endpoint. It's a transition. And transitions can't be designed perfectly. The space fractured beside the architect, and Seraph 9 emerged. Form sharpened, posture rigid, eyes blazing with purpose. Containment protocols failing, Seraph said. I require permission to excise the variable. The variable. Nova. The architect considered. Too long. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Even he wasn't sure anymore. Design was fracturing under its own precision. Nova pulled free from my grip and stepped forward on her own. I won't be sorted, she said softly. Her form stabilized, not perfectly, but decisively. Two timelines aligned inside her without merging, coexisting instead of resolving. The archive surged in response. Choice made manifest. Seraph moved. I intercepted him, the glyph burning like a live wire through my chest. For the first time, my resistance wasn't symbolic. It was structural. The system bent around us, not breaking, not correcting. Adapting poorly. The architect raised his hand. The archive froze. Then, cracked. Not shattering, misaligning. Design layers slipped out of sync, recursive loops feeding back into themselves. His control was absolute, but absolute systems fail catastrophically when assumptions break. You have introduced irreversible complexity, he said. I met his gaze. Good. For the first time in existence. The architect did not know what came next. Reality tore open behind us, not deliberately, not cleanly. An emergency fracture. Unplanned. A flaw large enough to escape through. Seraph lunged. Too slow. I grabbed Nova, the archive roaring around us as containment collapsed inward. The architect watched, not reaching. Learning. You will return, he said calmly. Everything unfinished does. I didn't argue. I jumped. The fracture swallowed us. Timelines scraped past like broken glass, fragments slicing memory, sensation, identity. I felt parts of myself shear away, possibilities abandoned, futures denied. Nova held on. So did I. Below us, the archive folded back into silence. Above us, the architect's eyes multiplied, observing across countless branches, recalibrating already. This wasn't victory. It was escape. And escape buys time. We landed hard, not on ground, but on probability. A half-formed world stretched out before us, unstable but breathing. Skies flickered between dawn and dusk. Structures existed only when observed. Nova exhaled shakily. "We broke something," she said. I nodded. "Yes." Behind us, far beyond sight, I felt it, the architect resuming his work, redesigning the path forward with updated parameters. This time, with us included. The flaw wasn't eliminated. It was acknowledged. And that terrified him. Because now, the design had to account for life that refused to be finished. You've crossed the rift and seen what waits beyond. Like, share, and subscribe. Your journey through the unknown continues. Epic Outlast.